Where are they now? Professional wrestlers. The Giants of the Squared Circle, then and now. Written, produced, and directed by Barron. Narrated by Morgan Robinson. A note on this book. Everything you are about to hear is built from the public record. Interviews the wrestlers gave, autobiographies they wrote, matches that were broadcast to the whole world, obituaries written by people who loved them. Nothing here is invented. Where a life turned hard, we tell you the truth of it, but we do not linger over the wreckage, and we do not pretend to know a man's heart better than he knew it himself. These were performers who gave their bodies to a strange and beautiful line of work, and they are owed the same respect in the retelling that they earned in the ring. Some of the people in this book are still with us, still busy, still building second and third acts that would have seemed impossible from the top rope. Some of them are gone. We will hold both in the same hand because that is what it means to ask the question this whole series is built on. Not what happened to them at the height of it. What happened after? Where are they now? Introduction: the men who would not stay down. There is a particular kind of famous that professional wrestling makes, and it is unlike any other. A movie star you meet once in the dark for 2 hours. A singer you carry around in your ears. But a wrestler comes into your living room every single week, sometimes for 20 years, and he does the most honest, dishonest thing in all of entertainment. He tells you a story with his body. He bleeds a little. He gets up. He convinces an arena full of grown adults to rise to their feet and scream for a man in his underwear. And the miracle is that it works, that it has always worked, that some Saturday night in 1985 or 1998 or last week your father or your kid or you yourself stood up in the living room and believed. We freeze them at that moment. That is the trick of it. In our memory, they are forever 30 years old and indestructible, the music hitting, the crowd coming apart, the whole building shaking. We do not want to think about what it costs to be indestructible for a living. We do not want to think about the knees and the necks and the nights in a different city and the pills that started as a way to make the next town and became something else. We loved the myth so much that we forgot there was a person carrying it. This book is about the person carrying it. It is a walk back through the men and the women who were the biggest thing on television when television was still the center of the world, and then a walk forward to find out where the road took them. Some of these stories land soft. A man who reinvented himself into something bigger than wrestling ever was. A woman who kicked a door open that has never closed since. And some of these stories do not land soft at all. And we are going to tell you those too, because you already know them in your bones, because the hard ones are the reason you ask the question in the first place. There is something you should understand about why these people, of all the famous faces you grew up with, hold on to us the way they do. A wrestler is the only performer who never gets to hide behind a character completely. An actor says lines someone else wrote. A singer can lip-sync a bad night. But a wrestler puts his actual body on the line in front of you live, no second take. And when it goes wrong for real. And some part of you always knew that, even as a kid, even when you were told it was all a show. That is why the bond runs so deep. On some level, you understood that the man was really up there, really falling, really getting up. You were not watching a story about courage. You were watching the thing itself. And because it was real, the aftermath is real too. The knee that will not bend at 50. The name that means nothing to the person ringing up your groceries but meant everything to you at 9 years old. The obituary that stops you cold in a grocery store checkout line because a piece of your childhood just left the world. We are going to honor all of it, the triumph and the toll, because you cannot love the one honestly without acknowledging the other. So let us go back. The music is about to hit. The giants who built the boom. Before wrestling was a global corporation with a stock ticker, it was a traveling carnival that happened to find television. And the men who carried it out of the smoke-filled territory halls and onto the biggest stages in the world were larger than the buildings they filled. This is where it started. This is the generation that made your grandfather a fan and then made you one. Hulk Hogan. You have to start here because for an entire generation there was no wrestling without him. Terry Bollea, a bass player from Tampa with 24-inch arms and a voice like a gravel truck, became Hulk Hogan, and Hulk Hogan became the most famous wrestler who ever lived. When he slammed Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3 in front of 93,000 people, he did not just win a match. He mainstreamed an entire art form. He put wrestling on the cover of magazines, in Saturday morning cartoons, in movies, on the lunchboxes of 10 million kids who were told to say their prayers and eat their vitamins, and mostly, gloriously, did. He was the face of the 1980s boom, a multiple-time world champion in both of the companies that mattered. And then in 1996, he did the other thing a legend can do. He turned on everyone. He became the villain at the center of the New World Order, and he proved he could reinvent the whole business a second time. The later years were more complicated, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. There were controversies that cost him, publicly and personally, and he spent his last decade as a more polarizing figure than the hero who once told children to train and pray. And then on July 24, 2025, at his home in Clearwater, Florida, Hulk Hogan died of a heart attack. He was 71. He had been quietly fighting serious illness. The most famous wrestler in the history of the world was gone, and the tributes that poured in captured the whole tangled truth of him, that a man can be a flawed human being and still be the reason millions of people fell in love with something. It is hard now to overstate how big he was at the peak. He headlined 8 of the first 9 editions of WrestleMania. He acted opposite Sylvester Stallone in a Rocky film. His entrance music, the guitar and the drums and the words about being a real American, is one of the few pieces of wrestling audio that a person who has never watched a match can still hum. The red and yellow he wore is as recognizable a costume as anything in American pop culture. And when he shocked the world in 1996 by trading it for the black and white of the villains, he demonstrated that he understood the business at a level even his critics had to respect. 2 decades apart, he headlined the biggest boom periods of 2 different companies. No one else can say that. Where is he now? He is a memory that shaped an industry, and the industry has not stopped reckoning with him since. Andre the Giant. The man Hogan slammed was in many ways the more impossible legend. André René Roussimoff was born in France with a condition called acromegaly, which made him grow without stopping, and by adulthood he was billed at 7 feet 4 and over 500 pounds, and he was, for the better part of 2 decades, the single biggest attraction on the planet. Not the biggest wrestler, the biggest draw. Promoters would bring him into a territory for a few weeks, sell out every building, and send him on, because there was only one of him and everyone on earth wanted to see him. He was undefeated in the public imagination for years, a giant who was also, by every account, one of the boys, a man who drank in legendary quantities and laughed in a register you could feel in your chest, and carried a loneliness that came with being unlike anyone else alive. A generation that never watched a single match still knows his face, because he played Fezzik in The Princess Bride, gentle and enormous and kind. Andre died in his sleep in Paris in January 1993 of congestive heart failure after returning home to be with his father. He was 46. He had spent his whole life being told his body was a marvel, and it was the thing that finally gave out. He was the very first person inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, and there has never been anyone like him before or since. The stories about him have become folklore, and the remarkable thing is how many of them are true. The bar tabs that ran into the hundreds of drinks. The gentleness with children, who were the only people on earth not frightened by his size. The pain he lived in every day, because acromegaly does not just make a body large, it wears that body out, and he wrestled through agony that would have hospitalized a normal man. He could have coasted on being a curiosity. Instead, he learned to work, to bump, to make his smaller opponents look heroic. and his willingness at the very end of his career to lose to Hulk Hogan and pass the torch is one of the most selfless acts the business has on record. He knew what it would do for the younger man, and he did it anyway. Where is he now? He is the standard by which every giant in wrestling is still measured, and none have come close. Ric Flair. If Hogan was the hero of the cartoon, Ric Flair was the villain you secretly wanted to be. Richard Fleer, styling and profiling in a $1,000 robe, was the 16-time world champion, the nature boy, the limousine-riding, jet-flying, kiss-stealing wheeling dealer who could talk for 10 minutes and make you believe every impossible word. More than any single performer, Flair built the template for what a main event wrestler could be, and his 1989 series of matches with Ricky Steamboat is still taught, quietly, as close to perfect as the form gets. And Ric Flair is still here, which is its own kind of miracle given how hard he lived. He has survived a health collapse that nearly killed him, and he has publicly declared himself cancer-free. But the truth in 2026 is that his health is fragile. He has been in and out of hospitals with heart trouble, and he shares those scares with his fans in real time because that is who Ric Flair has always been, a man who does nothing quietly. What is easy to miss, behind the robes and the catchphrase and the woo that entire arenas still shout back at him, is that Ric Flair may be the hardest-working main event wrestler who ever lived. For the better part of 2 decades, he wrestled 60 minutes a night, night after night, in every territory in the country, and he could have a great match with a broomstick, which is nearly what he was asked to do some nights. He made everyone he faced look like a world beater, because a champion in his philosophy was only as good as the challengers he elevated. He is the 16-time champion, but the number that matters more is the countless other careers he made real by losing to them at the right moment. He gave the business everything, including, very nearly, his life, and the fact that he is still here to be difficult and dazzling is something the whole industry is quietly grateful for. Where is he now? He is an old lion in the winter, still roaring, still styling, and everyone who loves the business holds their breath a little every time the phone lights up with his name. Ricky Steamboat. The other half of those perfect matches landed about as soft as this business allows. Richard Blood, who wrestled as Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, was the greatest pure babyface of his era, a technician so smooth and so honest that crowds who came to boo simply could not do it. His match with Randy Savage at WrestleMania 3, on the same card where Hogan slammed Andre, is still cited by wrestlers themselves as one of the greatest ever performed. He walked away with his mind and his dignity intact, which in this line of work is not a given. Today, Steamboat is a beloved elder statesman signed to All Elite Wrestling in an ambassador role, turning up to bless a show with his presence, guest timekeeper at a major event, Forever the Dragon. His career is quiet evidence of a truth the business does not always want to hear, which is that you did not have to live recklessly to be great. Steamboat was famously clean living, a devoted family man who avoided the excesses that swallowed so many of his peers, and he was still, by common consent, one of the finest in-ring performers who ever laced up a pair of boots. The trade-off shows in where he is now. While too many of the men he shared arenas with are in the sadder chapters of this book, Steamboat is here, healthy, his memory and his dignity fully intact, welcomed like royalty by a business that knows exactly what it has in him. Where is he now? He is proof that you can give this business everything and still come out the other side whole, and the younger generation treats him like the treasure he is. Roddy Piper. Roderick Toombs was the most dangerous man in wrestling because you never knew what he was going to say. Rowdy Roddy Piper, the kilted Scotsman who was actually a Canadian, ran a talk segment called Piper's Pit, where he once smashed a coconut over a man's head. And he was so good at making people hate him that he became, eventually, one of the most beloved figures the business ever produced. He headlined the very first WrestleMania. He crossed over into film, most famously in the cult classic They Live, where he delivered a line every movie fan can still quote. Piper lived hot and fast and admitted near the end that he did not expect to make old bones. He was right. He died in his sleep in July 2015 of cardiac arrest at 61. He left behind a family he adored and a body of work that no one has matched for sheer, unpredictable danger. The genius of Roddy Piper was that he made you forget it was a performance. When he grabbed the microphone, there was a live-wire unpredictability to him that no amount of scripting could manufacture, a sense that he might say or do anything, and audiences leaned in precisely because they were not sure they were safe. He was the greatest talker of his generation in a business built on talking, and he did it without ever holding the top championship, which almost no one else has managed because he did not need the belt. He was the whole show on his own, and late in his life, the villain the whole country once despised had become an elder the whole country adored, which is the arc every great heel secretly hopes for and few ever live to see. Where is he now? He is the patron saint of every wrestler who ever grabbed a microphone and made the whole arena lean in, not knowing what came next. Dusty Rhodes. The American dream was a plumber's son from Texas with a lisp and a belly, and absolutely no business being one of the most charismatic men who ever lived, and that was exactly the point. Virgil Runnels, wrestling as Dusty Rhodes, spoke for the working man because he was the working man, and his Hard Times promo, delivered in 1985, is still studied as maybe the finest piece of talking in wrestling history. A speech about layoffs and hard luck and hope that had grown men in tears in the cheap seats. He was a 3-time world champion, and then he did something rarer. He became one of the great teachers, mentoring a whole generation of modern stars in the developmental system, including his own sons, Cody and Dustin, who carry the name forward today. Dusty died in June 2015 after a fall at home, at 69. His gift was that he made ordinary people feel seen. He did not have the body of a Greek god or the polish of a leading man. He had a belly and a lisp and a way of talking that sounded like your uncle at a barbecue. And that was exactly why the working people in the cheap seats loved him, because he was one of them and he never pretended otherwise. When he talked about hard times, about the plant closing and the wolf at the door, he was speaking a language the fancy villains in their $1,000 robes could not touch, and it made him one of the biggest draws in the country. Then he grew into the teacher who quietly shaped the entire modern era from behind the curtain, and lived to watch his son pick up the dream and carry it to the very top. Where is he now? He is in every wrestler who ever cut a promo about being an underdog, and he is in his son Cody, who main evented WrestleMania carrying his father's dream on his back. The Iron Sheik. Hassan Khosrow Ali Vaziri was a real amateur wrestler, an Olympic-level talent from Iran who served as a bodyguard to royalty before he ever put on the boots. And he became, in America in the early 1980s, the most hated man in every building he entered. The Iron Sheik was the villain the country loved to loathe. And when he lost the championship to Hulk Hogan in January 1984, that single moment lit the fuse on the entire Hulkamania era. Wrestling history turns on that night, and he was the man on the other side of it. The beautiful surprise of his life was the third act. Late in life, the Iron Sheik became a wildly beloved, gloriously profane social media personality, embraced by a new generation who had no memory of him as a villain and simply adored the funny, ferocious old man. He died in June 2023 at 81. His is one of the more quietly redemptive arcs in the whole book. For years, he was the foreign menace Americans were supposed to hate, a role he played to perfection in a tense era, and roles like that can trap a man and sour him. Instead, with the help of a devoted team who looked after him in his later years, he found a completely unexpected second fame as an elder who said the outrageous things everyone else was thinking. And the country that once booed him ended up laughing along with him and finally loving him. There is a lesson buried in that, about how the villain and the beloved figure can be the same person separated only by time and a little grace. Where is he now? He is proof that if you live long enough and stay exactly yourself, the booze can turn into love. Jake the Snake Roberts. Some wrestlers overpowered you. Jake Roberts got inside your head. Aurelian Smith Jr. wrestled as Jake the Snake, and he was the most psychologically menacing performer of his time, a quiet, intelligent man who carried a live python to the ring and invented the DDT, a finishing move so sudden and so cool that it entered the language. He did not need to shout. He made you afraid by lowering his voice. His road got very dark. Addiction nearly killed him, and for years his was the cautionary tale, the brilliant mind lost to the needle and the bottle. And then his story became the opposite. His friend Diamond Dallas Page took him in, got him sober, got him healthy, and gave the world one of the great redemption stories in the film The Resurrection of Jake the Snake. Today Jake is frail, and his health is precarious, and he has had serious heart trouble. But he is sober, and he is here, and he tells his story so that other people can find their way out of the same hole. The reason his recovery moved so many people is that no one had believed it was possible, least of all Jake himself. He had been written off, more than once, as a man simply waiting to die, and the footage of him at his lowest is genuinely hard to watch. That the same man is now a sober elder statesman, cracking jokes and mentoring the young and speaking openly about the disease that nearly took him, is close to a miracle, and it happened because one friend refused to accept the ending everyone else had penciled in. Jake the Snake spent his career getting inside people's heads to frighten them. He spends his second act getting inside people's heads to reach them, to tell the ones in the same hole that there is a way out because he found it. Where is he now? He is a survivor, which is not a word anyone thought they would ever use for Jake Roberts, and it is the best word there is. Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Not every giant of that era was a champion. Some were simply beloved, and few were more beloved than James Duggan, who marched to the ring waving an American flag and carrying a 2x4, hollering a single syllable, "Hoo," that entire arenas would holler back. Hacksaw Jim Duggan won the very first Royal Rumble in 1988, and he made a whole career out of pure, uncomplicated, flag-waving joy. Today, Duggan is in the fight of his life, and he is facing it the way he faced everyone in the ring, out loud and unafraid. He has battled cancer more than once, and when his prostate cancer returned, he took his fans through the treatment with him and rang the bell at the end of a round of radiation, and kept right on being the most relentlessly positive man in the business. There is something fitting about the fact that the man whose whole gimmick was rousing an entire arena to shout a single joyful syllable back at him has spent his hardest years doing exactly the same thing with his health. He turns the fight into a rallying cry. He posts the updates, good and bad, and thousands of people who grew up waving imaginary 2x4s along with him rally around, and you get the sense it genuinely helps him to know they are out there. Hacksaw Jim Duggan was never the best technical wrestler in any building, and he would be the first to tell you so with a laugh. What he was, and what he still is one of the most beloved because pure uncomplicated joy is its own kind of greatness, and he has more of it than almost anyone the business ever produced. Where is he now? He is a cancer awareness advocate who refuses to be anything but hopeful, and every who you hear in an arena is still a little bit for him. SGT Slaughter. He was a drill instructor come to life, all jutting jaw and campaign hat and parade ground bark, and for a while Robert Remus, wrestling as SGT. Slaughter was one of the most recognizable characters in the entire business, so recognizable that he became an actual action figure in the G.I. Joe line and a Saturday morning cartoon character, which put him in the bedrooms of kids who had never seen a match. He played both sides of the patriotic coin over his career, beloved all-American hero and, controversially, turncoat villain, and he headlined WrestleMania 7 against Hulk Hogan at the very top of the card. Today, Slaughter is in his late 70s and remains a fixture of the WWE family as one of its legends and ambassadors. The old soldier who turns up at conventions and anniversary shows to sign autographs and swap stories, always in character, always at attention. There is a devotion in that consistency that fans have come to treasure. Some performers step out of character the moment the camera is off. Sergeant Slaughter never really has. Meet him at a signing table, and you will get the jutting jaw, the drill instructor bark softened by a wink, the sense that this man has been proudly playing the same role for 4 decades because he genuinely loves what it gives to the people who walk up to shake his hand. He is a living link to a whole era of the business, the last of a certain kind of larger-than-life patriotic character, and the fact that a generation of kids first met him as a cartoon, and a toy means his reach went far beyond the people who ever watched a match. Where is he now? He is a happily retired institution, a man whose face sold 1 million toys, still standing his post decades later, and the salute he gets from younger fans is entirely genuine. Macho Man Randy Savage. There was no one else like him before or after. Randy Poffo, the son of a wrestler, wrestled as Macho Man Randy Savage, and he was a coiled spring of a man, jittery and brilliant and completely committed, with a voice like a rusted hinge and a wardrobe visible from space. He was a 2-time WWF and 4-time WCW World Champion, and his WrestleMania 3 match with Ricky Steamboat is on every honest list of the greatest matches ever wrestled, because Savage rehearsed every single second of it when other men improvised, and it showed. He found love in the business too, his real-life romance with Miss Elizabeth becoming one of wrestling's most famous stories, tender and turbulent and finally sad. Randy Savage died in May 2011 at 58 when his heart gave out while he was driving. It was ruled a natural death. He was a perfectionist in a business that often rewarded winging it. Where other wrestlers improvised, Savage mapped out every second of a match in advance, drove his opponents half crazy with the detail of it, and the result is that his best work holds up decades later while flashier matches have faded. There was a coiled intensity to him that never fully switched off, in the ring or out of it, the same relentlessness that made him great making the rest of life harder. And his love story with Miss Elizabeth, the manager who stood in his corner and eventually became his wife, played out in front of the whole world, tender and volatile and finally sad, one of the first times wrestling asked its audience to care about a real romance. When people say there has never been another like him, the intensity is what they mean. Where is he now? He is the sound of a generation, oh yeah, and he is one of the very few performers about whom other wrestlers speak in something close to awe. The body keeps the score. Before we go on, we have to talk about the price, because it runs underneath every story in this book like a fault line. Professional wrestling is choreographed. It is not fake. Those are 2 different words, and the difference between them is written on the bodies of everyone you have just met and everyone you are about to meet. The bumps are real. Falling flat on your back on a mat stretched over wood 300 nights a year for 20 years does to a spine exactly what you would think. The chairs are real. The ladders are real. The concrete is very real. And for most of the history of this business, there were no guaranteed contracts, no off-season, no union, no health insurance worth the name. If you did not wrestle, you did not get paid, so you wrestled hurt. And to wrestle hurt, you needed something for the pain, and the something for the pain is where a heartbreaking number of these stories go wrong. You will notice as we move through the ones we lost, how young so many of them were. 36, 38, 39. Hearts that simply stopped in men who looked like Greek statues. That is not a coincidence. That is the bill arriving early for a lifetime of asking a human body to do things human bodies were not built to do, and then medicating it so it could get up and do them again tomorrow. There is a phrase wrestlers use for the life, the schedule of it, the constant motion, and the phrase is the road. The road is not a metaphor. It is a rental car at 2 in the morning, 4 men who just beat each other up sharing gas money and driving 300 miles to do it again, gas station food and motel ice machines, and a body that never fully heals because it never gets the chance. For decades, there were no days off built into that road. No off-season like other athletes get. No team plane. You made the next town or you got replaced by someone who would. Families back home grew up in photographs. Marriages strained under the weight of a man who was gone 200 nights a year. When you hear that a wrestler struggled at home or leaned on something to keep going, remember the road, because the road is where a great deal of the damage in this book was done. We tell you this not to frighten you, and certainly not to lecture the dead. We tell you because you cannot understand where these people ended up without understanding what the road did to them along the way. The business is safer now. There is testing, and there is time off, and there is a wellness program that exists in large part because of the funerals that forced it into being. Keep that fault line in mind. It explains more than any single story could. The Attitude Era. By the late 1990s, the cartoon was over. Wrestling grew up, got edgier, got louder, and for a few white-hot years, it was the most popular thing on cable television, two companies at war for the soul of a Monday night. The men who fought that war became the last true mainstream wrestling superstars, and most of them, remarkably, are still here to tell you about it. Stone Cold Steve Austin. He was the biggest star the business ever made, bigger even than Hogan at the peak, and he did it by being everything Hogan was not. Steve Austin was a beer-drinking, boss-hating, bird-flipping Texan who spoke for every person who ever wanted to tell their manager exactly where to go, and his feud with the villainous owner Vince McMahon was the engine that won the Monday Night Wars. When Austin's music hit, glass shattered and the whole building lost its mind. A neck injury forced him out of full-time wrestling far too early, at the height of his drawing power. It is worth remembering how enormous that height was, because there has never been a hotter act in the history of the business. For a stretch in the late 90s, Steve Austin was selling more merchandise, drawing more television viewers, and generating more genuine mainstream heat than any wrestler ever had, Hogan at his peak included. The image of a working man flipping off his boss and getting away with it landed in exactly the right cultural moment, and millions of people who had never cared about wrestling tuned in specifically to watch him raise hell. The tragedy underneath the triumph is that his body could not keep up with his stardom. He wrestled his last match far younger than he should have, his neck simply unable to take any more, and he has been candid that walking away at the top before he was ready was one of the hardest things he ever did. And where did the toughest man in wrestling land? About as well as anyone in this book. Steve Austin is a beloved elder statesman who turns up for the occasional surprise appearance, hosts a hugely popular podcast, brews his own beer, and most delightfully, races trucks. In his late 50s, he took up serious off-road desert racing and actually won a professional class race in the Nevada desert. He leaves the door open a crack for one more WrestleMania moment, and every fan quietly hopes he walks through it. Where is he now? He is living exactly the life he sold you on his own terms, and not one person begrudges him a minute of it. The Rock. Dwayne Johnson was a failed football player sleeping on a mattress he found in a dumpster, and he became, arguably, the single most famous human being to ever come out of this business. As The Rock, he was the most electrifying performer of the Attitude Era, a multiple-time champion with a gift for the microphone that has genuinely never been equaled. And then he did the thing that no wrestler had ever truly done at that scale. He left, and he conquered the other mountain. Today, Dwayne Johnson is one of the highest-paid movie stars in the world, and a member of the board of the corporation that now owns WWE itself, which is to say he did not just escape the business. He came back and helped own it. In 2026, he earned serious awards attention, a Golden Globe nomination, for a dramatic role in The Smashing Machine, stretching himself as an actor decades into fame. He still turns up in the ring now and then, because the roar never fully leaves your blood. What makes his story matter to everyone else in this book is what it proved. For generations, wrestlers were told there was a ceiling, that this was as far as the business could take you, that Hollywood would never take a man in trunks seriously. The Rock did not just break that ceiling. He obliterated it, and in doing so he changed how the entire world sees professional wrestling and the people who do it. When he hosts an awards show or opens a blockbuster or takes a seat in a corporate boardroom, he is carrying every wrestler who was ever told to know their place, and he knows it, and he says so. He never distanced himself from where he came from. He made the wider world respect it. Where is he now? He is the ceiling. He is the proof of exactly how high this thing can take a person who has the gift, and no one has ever climbed higher. Mick Foley. If The Rock was the beauty, Mick Foley was the sacrifice. A soft-spoken, bookish man in real life, Foley threw his body into a wood chipper for 2 decades under 3 different names: Cactus Jack and Mankind and Dude Love. And he is remembered most for a single night in 1998 when he was thrown off the top of a 20-foot steel cage. And then threw it in the most famous act of physical insanity the business has ever broadcast. The bill for that came due in his joints, and for years Foley moved like a much older man. But his recent update is one of the happiest in this whole book. He lost around 100 pounds, got a new hip and a new knee, and describes himself as having a new lease on life. He never lost his mind or his warmth, became a best-selling author several times over, and remains one of the most genuinely liked human beings the industry has produced. The contrast at the center of Mick Foley is the thing that makes him unforgettable. Off camera, he is a gentle, funny, sentimental man who loves Christmas and writes children's books and tears up easily. On camera, he did things to his own body that make people wince to describe. Threw himself off cages and onto thumbtacks and through flaming tables. And he did it not because he was reckless, but because he had decided that giving the audience a feeling they would never forget was worth the price his body would pay. He paid that price for decades, and the fact that he is now lighter and rebuilt and moving well and calling it a new lease on life is one of the small mercies this book has to offer. The man who sacrificed the most is, against all odds, doing just fine. Where is he now? He is healthier than he has been in years, telling stories instead of taking bumps, and grateful out loud every single day. The Undertaker. For 30 years, Mark Calloway was a supernatural force. The Undertaker, the Deadman, the Phenom, walked to the ring in darkness and buried opponents for 3 decades, and built the most sacred single achievement in the business. An undefeated streak at WrestleMania that ran for over 20 years, and that fans would hold their breath to protect. He was the locker room's respected leader, the man who set the standard for what a professional was supposed to be. He retired in 2020 on his own terms, and his second act is quiet and content. He hosts a podcast with his wife, the former wrestler Michelle McCool, and in 2025 that show got its own home under the WWE banner. He shows up to be honored, tall and dignified, the last of a certain kind of larger-than-life character that the modern, more realistic business does not really make anymore. For 30 years, he protected something the business had all but forgotten how to protect, which is mystery. In an era when every secret gets posted online within the hour, The Undertaker stayed in character in public for decades, never breaking the illusion, because he understood that the illusion was a gift he was giving the audience, and he refused to cheapen it. He was also, by universal account, the conscience of the locker room, the veteran who kept the young talent honest, and the enforcer whose respect you had to earn. When wrestlers describe the ideal professional, the person who did everything the right way for 30 straight years and never once coasted, they are very often describing him. Where is he now? He is at peace, which is a strange and lovely thing to say about the Deadman, and he earned every bit of it. Bret Hitman Hart. Bret Hart called himself the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. And the remarkable thing is that a great many serious people think he might have been right. The excellence of execution was the finest technical wrestler of his generation, a multiple-time world champion who could make any opponent look like $1 million. And his story carries two of the deepest wounds in wrestling history: a notorious backstage betrayal in Montreal in 1997, and the death of his younger brother Owen, whom you will meet later in this book. Bret has survived things that would have ended most men: a stroke and a bout with prostate cancer, and he has turned that survival into advocacy, urging men to get tested early, because early is what saved him. In 2025, his classic match was honored as the inaugural entry in a new WWE Hall of Fame category. He is a little slower now, and he guards his time, but he is here, and he is respected as one of the true masters of the craft. He earned the right to be a little prickly, if you ask most fans, because Bret Hart carried a kind of honesty into a dishonest business, and it cost him. He believed the championship should be defended by the best wrestler, that the matches should mean something, that a handshake should hold. And the night in Montreal when a handshake did not hold broke something in him that took years to mend. That he came through all of it, the betrayal and the loss of his brother and a stroke that could have ended him and a cancer that could have too, and came out the other side as an advocate telling other men to get their health checked, is its own quiet act of championship. He was the excellence of execution in the ring. He turned out to be pretty excellent at surviving, too. Where is he now? He is a survivor and an elder, still sharp, still proud, carrying his family's complicated history with a dignity that has hardened into grace. Shawn Michaels. He was the Heartbreak Kid, and for a while he was the best in-ring performer alive and one of the most self-destructive men in the locker room, and both of those things were true at the same time. Michael Hickenbottom, wrestling as Shawn Michaels, lost years to injury and to his own worst instincts, walked away, got his life together, came back, and had a celebrated second career that many people rate even higher than his first. He was Mr. WrestleMania. He could have the greatest match on any card at any age. And now he is arguably more important to the business than he ever was as a wrestler. Shawn Michaels runs WWE's developmental brand as a senior executive, the head of talent development, which means the future of the entire industry passes through his hands. The reckless kid who nearly threw it all away grew into the steady veteran who teaches the next generation how not to. The turnaround is worth pausing on, because it is not a small thing to admit you were the problem and then do the work. There was a version of the Shawn Michaels story that ends badly. A brilliant, self-sabotaging talent who burns out young and becomes a cautionary tale. And for a while that was exactly the trajectory he was on. A back injury forced him out. He got his life in order during the years away. And when he came back, he was not only a better man, but somehow a better wrestler, turning in the finest matches of his career in his 40s, after most performers are finished. He got the rarest thing this business offers, a genuine second chance, and he did not waste it. That he now shapes the careers of hundreds of young wrestlers, teaching them the lessons he learned the hard way, is the most fitting possible ending for the story. Where is he now? He is the teacher, the architect of what comes next, and it is one of the most complete redemption arcs in the whole business. Kevin Nash. Big and cool and knowing, Kevin Nash was a 7-foot main event star who understood the business better than almost anyone, first as the WWF champion Diesel, and then as a founding member of the New World Order, the renegade faction that flipped wrestling on its head in the late 90s. He was one of the smartest men in any locker room, and he parlayed that easy charisma into a solid film and television career on the side. Today, Nash hosts a candid, popular podcast and speaks about the business with the hard-won clarity of a man who saw all of it. His recent years have carried real grief, the loss of his young son, and he has been honest about how heavy that weight is. We mention it gently because he has, and because it matters. On the lighter side of the ledger, few people in wrestling history had a better feel for the business as a business than Kevin Nash. He understood leverage, understood his own value, and was never shy about pointing out when the emperor had no clothes, which made him a locker room leader and occasionally a thorn in management's side. usually at the same time. That same sharp, unsentimental intelligence makes him a compelling voice today, because he tells the truth about how the sausage was made in a business that spent most of its history lying about everything. He has lived the whole range of it, the glory and the grief, and he talks about all of it without flinching. Where is he now? He is an elder voice of the business, funny and unfiltered and carrying a private sorrow with as much grace as a person can, and the respect the industry has for him is total. Scott Hall. His best friend in the business was Kevin Nash, and the two of them changed wrestling together. Scott Hall arrived in WWF as Razor Ramon, oozing a toothpick-flicking cool that no one has ever quite duplicated, and then jumped to WCW and helped launch the New World Order, one of the most important angles in the history of the form. He was, at his peak, one of the most naturally gifted performers alive. His road was one of the hardest in this book. Addiction shadowed him for decades, and for a long time it looked like it would be the end of the story. But with the help of friends, again including Diamond Dallas Page, Hall found sobriety and spent his final years as a candid, generous advocate for recovery, at peace with himself in a way he had not been in a long time. He died in March 2022 at 63 of complications following a fall and hip surgery. His send-off was a line he used to say, "The bad guy gets a second chance." The cool is the thing people remember first, because there was truly no one cooler. The toothpick, the slicked hair, the swagger, the way he would flick that toothpick into the crowd before a match, all of it copied endlessly and matched by no one. But the part that matters most is the ending he fought for. Scott Hall spent a long time as the saddest kind of cautionary tale, the enormous talent the business seemed determined to lose. And with the help of friends who refused to give up on him, he clawed his way to sobriety and spent his last years at peace, honest about his mistakes, generous with younger wrestlers, finally comfortable in his own skin. He did not get to be old, but he got to be well at the end, which for a while looked impossible, and that is the second chance he was talking about. Where is he now? He is remembered mercifully, not for the hard years, but for the cool and for the comeback, exactly as he wanted. Goldberg. He was a phenomenon in the most literal sense, a former NFL lineman who walked into WCW and ran off an undefeated streak billed at 173 wins and 0 losses. And for a couple of years in the late 90s, Bill Goldberg was the most protected, most explosive attraction in the business. He did not need to be a great technician. He needed to walk to the ring through a tunnel of sparks and destroy people in 3 minutes, and the crowd chanting his name shook the foundations. Goldberg got his proper ending, or close to it. In July 2025, in his hometown of Atlanta, he wrestled his retirement match for a world title, closing out a career that spanned nearly 30 years. He has been openly, characteristically blunt that he did not love how the send-off was booked, which is very on brand for a man who was always more force of nature than company man. His whole career was a lesson in the power of less. In an era when wrestlers were expected to have long, elaborate matches, Goldberg walked to the ring through a shower of sparks, destroyed his opponent in a couple of minutes, and left, and it worked precisely because it was so simple and so believable. He looked like he could actually do it, and so the audience never questioned it, and the undefeated streak became appointment television. He came to the business late from professional football, and he left it having been one of the most genuinely over attractions of his time. He does not pretend to have loved every minute of the industry, and there is something refreshing in that honesty. Where is he now? He is retired, home with his family, still built like a bank vault, and still, when he wants to be, the most intimidating presence in any room. Not every story lands soft. We come now to the part of the book that is the reason this whole series exists. When you ask where are they now, you are really asking 2 questions at once. You are asking about the ones who made it, and underneath that, in a quieter voice, you are asking about the ones who did not. You already sense that some of the faces you loved are gone. You half remember a headline. You are bracing for it a little even now. Here is how we are going to do this. We are going to tell you the truth, and we are going to tell it with our hats in our hands. We are not going to dwell on the worst night of anyone's life. We are not going to play coroner or judge. Where a life ended too soon, we are going to tell you who they were and what they gave you, and then we are going to let them rest. The tabloids already did the cruel version. We are here to do the kind one. Notice something as we go about the ages. In a fair world, the people in this section would still be here, most of them doing the convention circuit and posting on social media and grumbling about how the young guys have it easy. Some of them would be in their 50s. Some barely reached 40. When a wrestler dies young, the cause on the certificate is almost always the heart. And the heart in a wrestler is very often the last chapter of a much longer story that started with a bump he took years ago and a pain he had to manage to keep working. We are not going to detail those private battles here. We only ask that you hold the number in your mind, the age, whenever we say it, because the number is the whole tragedy in a single digit. Take a breath. These are the ones we lost. The ones we lost too soon. Eddie Guerrero. He may be the most beloved wrestler who ever lived, and there is real competition for that title. Eddie Guerrero came from a legendary wrestling family and had to claw for everything, and what he built was something close to perfect. A performer who could make you laugh and break your heart inside the same 5 minutes, whose motto, lie, cheat, and steal, was delivered with such a wink that the whole world adored him for it. When he finally won the WWE Championship in 2004, after years of struggle both in the ring and in his own life, grown adults wept, because everyone knew what it had cost him. Eddie died in November 2005 in a hotel room of heart failure. He was 38. His heart, doctors said, had been worn down by the hard years he had already put behind him. He had been open about his past and about his recovery, and he had become, in sobriety, a mentor and a light to the whole locker room. To understand why his loss still lands so hard, you have to understand what he represented. Eddie Guerrero was the guy who did everything the hard way and made it look like joy. He was not the biggest or the most naturally gifted talker, but he could tell a complete story in the ring better than almost anyone alive, and he did it with a mischievous grin that let the whole audience in on the fun. When he finally reached the mountaintop, the crowd's roar was not just for a title change. It was for a man they had watched struggle in public and win anyway. And then a year later he was gone, and the grief was so total because everyone, the fans and the wrestlers both, had been rooting for him as a person, not just a character. His best friend gave the eulogy. His family carries him forward at the very top of the business. Where is he now? He is a benediction. When wrestlers point to the sky, a great many of them are pointing to Eddie. Owen Hart. Owen Hart was the youngest of the wrestling Harts, a supremely gifted performer, and by every single account, one of the kindest and funniest people in the entire industry. A devoted family man who played pranks to keep the long road bearable. He was a former king of the ring and a multiple-time champion, and he was beloved in a way that had nothing to do with villainy or heroics, and everything to do with the person he was when the cameras were off. Owen died on May 23, 1999, at 34 from a fall during a live event, when equipment failed during an entrance stunt he never should have been asked to do. It is the darkest night in the industry's history, and it changed the business forever, forcing a reckoning with safety that has saved lives since. His family fought for accountability and built a foundation in his name that has helped countless people. In 2025, he was inducted into the Hall of Fame. We state the facts of that day plainly, and we do not embellish them because the plain facts are heavy enough. What everyone wants you to know about Owen, the thing his friends say first, is that he was the funny one. The prankster of the locker room, the family man who counted the days until he could get home to his wife and kids, the brother who never quite took the grandeur of the business as seriously as the business took itself, because he had his priorities straight. He was also quietly one of the most gifted in-ring performers in the whole company, good enough to have been a world champion for years if that had been the path he wanted. He wanted to do good work and get home safe. He should have gotten home. The reforms that followed his death, the scrutiny of every stunt and rigging and shortcut, are the reason a great many performers since have gotten home safe, and that is a legacy he never asked for and never should have had to leave. Where is he now? He is the reason 100 safety rules exist, and he is loved still with an ache that time has not touched. British Bulldog. Davy Boy Smith was a powerhouse from England with a physique like a comic book and a smile the crowd adored. And he wrestled what many in his home country still call the greatest match in British history, beating his own brother-in-law Bret Hart in front of 80,000 people at Wembley Stadium in 1992 to win the Intercontinental Championship. For that one night, he was the biggest star in the biggest building of his life, in front of his own people. The British Bulldog died in May 2002 at 39 of a heart attack that a coroner tied to the long physical toll of his career. He was another young heart that simply stopped. His children have followed him into the business, carrying the Bulldog forward. That Wembley night in 1992 deserves to be remembered on its own, because moments like it are rare. 80,000 of his own countrymen packed a stadium, and the local boy, the son of England, wrestled his brother-in-law in a match so good that both men still get credited for it more than 30 years later. And at the end, the right man won and the roof came off the place. For one night, Davy Boy Smith was the biggest star in the world in the biggest building of his life, in front of the people who raised him. Not everyone in this book got a night like that. He did, and no one can ever take it from him. Where is he now? He is a Saturday night at Wembley in 1992 that an entire country still talks about, forever the local boy who conquered the world. Umaga. Eddie Fatu, who wrestled as Umaga, was a member of the legendary Anoa'i family, the great Samoan wrestling dynasty that includes The Rock and the current champions who rule the business today. Umaga was a genuinely frightening force in the mid-2000s, a savage, agile monster who was far more athletic than a man his size had any right to be, and who played a key role in one of the most famous mainstream angles the company ever did. He died in December 2009 at only 36. It is one of the losses that helped push the company toward the wellness testing that governs it now. His family, the Anoa'is, remain the beating heart of modern wrestling, so his blood is quite literally at the top of the industry today. He was better than his monster role ever let the casual fan see. Underneath the paint and the savagery was a genuinely gifted big man athlete who could move and fly in ways that startled people. And had he been given a different character or a longer life, he might have been remembered as one of the great in-ring talents of his generation rather than as a footnote and a warning. Instead, he became another young number in the grim arithmetic of that era, 36, a father gone. But the dynasty he belonged to turned that grief into resolve, and the cousins and nephews who now sit atop the whole business carry a little of him into every main event they headline. Where is he now? He is an uncle and a forebear to the dynasty that currently rules everything, and they carry him with them every time they walk out. Bray Wyatt. Wyndham Rotunda was a third-generation wrestler, and most people who worked with him agree. A genuine creative genius, the rare performer who dreamed up his own worlds. As Bray Wyatt, and later as the terrifying figure known as The Fiend, he built elaborate, cinematic, frightening characters unlike anything else on television, and he became a multiple-time world champion by making millions of people care about something closer to horror storytelling than to sport. He died in August 2023 at just 36 of a heart attack, after a COVID infection earlier that year aggravated a heart condition. His loss stunned the industry, because he was young and mid-career and so full of ideas about what wrestling could still become. His family carries the name, and his partner and children carry him. He was, more than almost anyone in his generation, an artist, and he treated wrestling as a canvas for genuine storytelling rather than just a contest. The characters he built were strange and layered, and a little frightening, drawing on horror and folklore and psychology, and he asked audiences to follow him somewhere wrestling had rarely tried to go. Some of it was divisive because real invention always is, but even the people who did not connect with every idea understood they were watching someone with a singular imagination. That is what makes losing him at 36 so hard to accept. He was not a performer running out his string. He was a creator who was just getting started, and we will never know what the next 20 years of his ideas would have looked like. Where is he now? He is the great unfinished story of the modern era, the visionary we did not get to see grow old, and the business is quietly poorer for the worlds he never got to build. Terry Funk. If you want to know what respect looks like in this business, watch how wrestlers talk about Terry Funk. He wrestled for more than half a century on every continent that would have him, an NWA world champion in the 1970s who reinvented himself again and again, all the way into hardcore legend status decades later, when men half his age were begging him to teach them how it was done. He retired more times than anyone can count and kept coming back because he simply loved it too much to stop. Terry Funk died in August 2023 at 79 of complications from dementia. Unlike so many in this section, he got to be old, and he spent that long life as the most respected working man the business ever produced, the wrestler's wrestler, generous with everyone. If you want a single image that captures him, picture this. A man in his 50s, then his 60s, long past the age when he needed to prove anything to anyone, still lying down in the ring to let a young wrestler pin him, still throwing himself off high places to make a kid on the way up look like a star, because he believed the business was a debt you paid forward, and he intended to pay it in full. He mentored generation after generation, and they worshipped him for it. He retired more times than anyone can count and came back every time, not for the money and not for the ego, but because he could not imagine a life that was not this life. 50 years he gave it. There has never been a truer working man in the history of the trade. Where is he now? He is the gold standard for a life given to this thing, the man every other wrestler in this book looked up to, and there was not a wasted year in the whole extraordinary run. Superstar Billy Graham. Before Hogan flexed, before Ventura talked, there was superstar Billy Graham, and everyone who came after borrowed from him. Wayne Coleman, wrestling as superstar Billy Graham, was a tie-dyed, silver-tongued, impossibly muscled innovator who was the WWF champion in the late 1970s, and his physique and his rhythmic, boasting interview style became the template that Hulk Hogan and Jesse Ventura and 100 others openly copied. He invented a way of being a wrestler that took over the whole industry. His later years were hard, marked by serious illness and by his own frank, complicated feelings about the business and its costs. He died in May 2023 at 79. We remember him, as he would probably want, for the influence rather than the grievances, because the influence is simply enormous. Consider the reach of one man. The look that Hulk Hogan rode to global fame, the tanned, enormous, larger-than-life physique came from superstar Billy Graham. The rhythmic, rhyming, boastful interview style that Hogan and Jesse Ventura and countless others made millions with, that came from superstar Billy Graham too. He was the prototype, the one who imagined a new kind of wrestling star before the business knew it wanted one, and then watched the men who copied him become far more famous than he ever was. There is a real ache in that, and he did not always hide it. But the honest measure of a person is what they changed, and by that measure Graham is a giant, because you cannot tell the story of the modern wrestling superstar without starting at him. Where is he now? He is the original blueprint. Nearly every larger-than-life talker who ever grabbed a microphone is speaking, whether they know it or not, in a dialect that superstar Billy Graham invented. Sabu. He was the daredevil, the human highlight reel, the man who seemed to have no regard whatsoever for his own body, and he defined an entire style. Terry Brunk, wrestling as Sabu, was the face of extreme, hardcore wrestling in the 1990s, a multiple-time champion in ECW, the scrappy Philadelphia company that changed everything. And he put himself through tables and barbed wire and chairs with a blank, fearless calm that made audiences gasp. He was the nephew of another wrestling legend, and he carried that lineage into the most violent corner of the business. Sabu died in May 2025 at 60, only weeks after wrestling what had been billed as his retirement match, a fitting last blow for a man who gave the ring everything. The cause was not made public, so we will not speculate. Where is he now? He is the patron saint of every wrestler who ever climbed too high and jumped anyway, and the hardcore style that fills independent arenas today is in large part the house that Sabu built. The Ultimate Warrior. For a couple of years, he was the closest thing wrestling had to a comic book come to life. James Hellwig, who eventually changed his legal name to simply Warrior, painted his face, tied bright tassels to his arms, sprinted to the ring at a dead run, and shook the ropes like he meant to tear the building down, and children absolutely lost their minds for him. He beat Hulk Hogan clean for the championship at WrestleMania 6 in 1990, in front of a stadium full of people, in one of the most electric title changes the business ever staged. He was pure kinetic energy, more feeling than technique, and the feeling was enormous. His relationship with the company that made him was stormy for decades, a long estrangement full of hard words on both sides. And then, in the spring of 2014, came one of the most haunting sequences of events in wrestling history. He reconciled with WWE, was inducted into the Hall of Fame, appeared at WrestleMania, and stood in the middle of the ring on Monday Night Raw one last time to cut a promo about how the spirit of a great performer lives on after the body is gone. The very next day, on April 8, 2014, he collapsed outside a hotel and died of a heart attack. He was 54. He had spoken that final night as if he somehow knew. There is no way to tell his story without sitting for a moment in the strangeness of that timing. For 20 years, he and the company had been estranged, trading lawsuits and hard words, and it seemed a reconciliation would never come. Then, all at once, it did. He came home, he was honored in front of his peers, he stood at WrestleMania, and on that final Monday night, he took the microphone and told the crowd that every man's heart one day stops, and that the way a person keeps living is in the memory of the people whose lives he touched, the fans who make the legend immortal by remembering. It was as fine a farewell as the business has ever produced, and he had no way of knowing it was a farewell. Within a day, he was gone. Wrestlers are not, as a rule, a superstitious bunch, but almost every one of them who was there that week speaks of it in a hush. Where is he now? He is a chill down the spine, a man who said goodbye and meant it and was gone within 24 hours, and his last words to the crowd have become a kind of scripture for the whole business. Yokozuna. He was billed as an unstoppable force of nature, and for a stretch in the early 1990s he genuinely was. Rodney Anoa'i, a member of the great Samoan wrestling family, performed as Yokozuna, a massive sumo-styled champion who holds a distinction almost no one else can claim. He is the only man to defeat both Hulk Hogan and Bret Hart for the WWF Championship, which means he stood at the center of the entire company during a pivotal changing of the guard. At well over 500 pounds, he moved with a grace that stunned people, and he was a genuinely gifted athlete trapped inside a body that was asking too much of itself. That body gave out far too early. Yokozuna died on October 23, 2000, at just 34, of pulmonary edema while on a tour of England. We state the medical cause plainly and leave the moralizing to others, because he was a beloved teammate and a devoted family man, and the Anoa'i dynasty he belonged to now sits at the very top of the modern business. His cousins inducted him into the Hall of Fame. It is worth pausing on what he accomplished in a very short career, because it is genuinely historic. For a Japanese-styled character, for a man of his size, to be positioned as the top champion of the whole company, the immovable object that both the all-American hero and the technical master had to overcome, was a remarkable thing, and he carried it with a grace and an in-ring intelligence that surprised everyone who assumed a 500-pound man could only stand still. He could move. He could sell. He could make a crowd believe. That his body could not sustain what his talent had earned is one of the quieter tragedies in this section. Another young man gone at an age when he should have been settling into a long life as a beloved veteran. Where is he now? He is a cornerstone of the greatest family in wrestling, gone decades too soon, remembered by his relatives every time one of them raises a championship that he helped make matter. Vader. Some monsters are cartoonish. Leon White, who wrestled as Big Van Vader, was a monster who actually frightened you. A former professional football player who moved like an avalanche and hit like 1-2, a multiple-time WCW world champion and an enormous star in Japan, where the hard-hitting style suited him perfectly. When Vader splashed you off the top rope, a 350-pound man flying through the air, it did not look survivable, and that was the point. He was proof that a giant could also be a legitimate, credible athlete. His later years were shadowed by serious heart trouble. Vader underwent heart surgery and was candid with fans about how much time the doctors thought he had left. He died in June 2018 at 63 after a month-long battle with pneumonia and the heart failure that followed. He spent his final stretch grateful and reflective, connected to the fans who had feared and adored him. In Japan, they still speak his name with something close to reverence, because it was there, in the legendary arenas of the 1990s, that Vader did his most respected work, hammering out brutal, world-class matches against the best that country produced and earning a level of respect that few American wrestlers ever have. He was proof that a man could be enormous and genuinely frightening, and also a real athlete and a real artist. That size did not have to mean clumsiness. Late in life, as his heart began to fail him, he was candid with his fans about the diagnosis and the time he had left, and he faced it with the same head-down toughness he had always shown in the ring. The monster turned out to be, at the end, a thoughtful and grateful man. Where is he now? He is the gold standard for the wrestling monster, the rare big man who was genuinely great, and the wrestlers who study how to make size feel dangerous are still studying tape of him. Junkyard Dog. Before we leave this section, we have to honor a man who broke a barrier that too few people talk about. Sylvester Ritter, wrestling as the Junkyard Dog, was one of the most beloved stars of the entire 1980s. A charismatic, dancing, chain-wearing fan favorite who was, by wide agreement, the first black wrestler to be the undisputed top draw of a major American promotion. In the territory that made him, in the deep south of the early 80s, he sold out arenas full of fans of every background who simply adored him. And that mattered in that time and that place in a way that went well beyond wrestling. His story carries a quiet heartbreak. Junkyard Dog died on June 2, 1998, at 45 in a single-car accident, having fallen asleep at the wheel on the drive home from his own daughter's high school graduation. He had worked hard to put earlier struggles behind him, and he died coming home from one of the proudest days a father gets. His daughter accepted his Hall of Fame induction. His importance is bigger than the arenas he sold out, and it deserves to be said plainly. In a time and a place where the deck was stacked against him, the Junkyard Dog became the most beloved figure in his corner of the wrestling world. A man that crowds of every background rose to their feet for. And in doing so, he quietly proved something the business had been slow to admit, that a black performer could be the top hero, the face of the whole show, the one the fans loved most. Every star who came after and got to be the centerpiece owes a piece of that to him, whether they know his name or not. He should be remembered far more often than he is, and the hope is that telling his story here, gently and with respect, sends a few listeners to look him up and discover the joy he brought. Where is he now? He is a pioneer whose name deserves to be said more often than it is. The man who proved a black babyface could carry a company on his back, and every star who followed walks on a road he helped clear. Rob Van Dam. One more from the hardcore world, and this one is happily still with us. Rob Shatkowski, wrestling as Rob Van Dam, was Mr. Monday Night, the whole show, a martial arts-trained high flyer whose relaxed, cool, and spectacular offense made him the single most popular star of the original ECW. And later, one of the few men ever to hold the WWE and ECW World Championships at the same time. He wrestled a style no one else could copy, half kickboxer and half acrobat, and he made it look completely effortless. Today, in his mid-50s, Van Dam is semi-retired but stubbornly not done. He broke both of his heels in a match in 2025, healed up, and has openly talked about wrestling more because the itch never fully leaves. He hosts a popular podcast, entered the Hall of Fame a few years back, and recently welcomed twin daughters, naming one in tribute to his late friend Sabu. That last detail says everything about where his heart is. The hardcore world was a brotherhood, a small band of men who put their bodies through things no sane person would, and they looked after one another because no one else understood. When Sabu passed, Van Dam did not just post a tribute and move on. He named his daughter after his friend, so the name would keep living in his own house. That is the kind of loyalty this corner of the business runs on. For all the tables and the chairs and the chaos, the people who lived that life came out of it with fierce bonds, and Rob Van Dam, easygoing and grinning and seemingly ageless, carries his fallen friends with him into whatever comes next. Where is he now? He is an easygoing elder of the hardcore generation, still capable of stealing a show when he feels like it, living proof that not every extreme wrestling story ends in this book's sadder chapters. The women who kicked the door open. For most of the history of this business, women were an afterthought. They were given 90 seconds and told to smile, treated as a break between the real matches, and the men who ran things could not imagine it any other way. Everything you see now, women main eventing WrestleMania, women selling out arenas on their own names, women treated as the athletes they always were, exists because a handful of performers refused to accept 90 seconds and a smile. They paid for it. They were doubted and underused, and in an ugly era, sometimes treated worse than that. But they kicked the door so hard that it came off the hinges, and it has never been put back. This next group did not just change where women stand in wrestling. They changed whether women got to stand there at all. It is worth saying plainly how far it has come, because the distance is the whole point. There was a time, not that long ago, when the women's segment existed to give the crowd a chance to visit the concession stand. Now women headline the biggest show of the year. Now a girl in the 10th row holds up a sign for her favorite wrestler, and that wrestler is a woman. And neither of them thinks that is remarkable. And the fact that it is not remarkable anymore is the single greatest tribute you could pay to the 4 women you are about to meet. They did the unglamorous, unrewarded work of being first, of being doubted, of being the argument, so that the girl in the 10th row would never have to be. The women who changed the business. Chyna. There had never been anything like her. Joni Laura, wrestling as Chyna, was billed as the 9th wonder of the world, a genuinely groundbreaking performer who did the thing no one thought a woman could do. She wrestled the men. Not in a novelty match, but for real, as an equal, as the enforcer of the most popular faction of the Attitude Era. And she became the first and still only woman ever to hold the Intercontinental Championship, a men's title, and the first woman to enter the Royal Rumble and the King of the Ring. She broke barriers that had stood since the beginning. Her life after wrestling was difficult and public, and she struggled in ways that were painful to watch for anyone who admired her. She died in April 2016 at 46, of an accidental combination of medications. There is an ongoing, uncomfortable conversation about the fact that she has never been individually honored in the Hall of Fame, and reasonable people find that hard to defend, because the in-ring legacy is simply undeniable. It is worth sitting with how genuinely radical she was. Before Chyna, the idea of a woman competing with the men was a punchline, and she walked out and made it a threat, and then a reality, and then, briefly, a championship. She did not ask for permission to be taken seriously. She simply was, physically and undeniably, and audiences that came to laugh stayed to cheer. Every woman later in this book who got to be treated as an athlete first was walking through a door that Chyna put her whole body against. The sadness of her later years is real, and we will not dress it up, but it should never be allowed to eclipse the enormity of what she accomplished when the lights were on, because what she accomplished changed the ceiling for everyone who came after. Where is she now? She is the pioneer every barrier-breaking woman in wrestling is measured against, the one who went first, and the door she kicked open has never once swung shut. Trish Stratus. She was hired to be eye candy, and she turned herself into one of the greatest of all time through sheer relentless work. Trish Stratus started with no wrestling background and trained so hard and improved so fast that within a few years she was carrying the entire women's division, a 7-time champion whose matches were often the ones people talked about the next day. More than almost anyone, she is credited with proving that women's wrestling could be a main attraction rather than an intermission. And Trish is thriving. She went into the Hall of Fame, built a life and a family and a yoga business, and then, well into her 40s, kept lacing the boots back up for celebrated returns, including a run around her 25th anniversary in the business that had her wrestling for the championship again against the young stars who grew up idolizing her. The full weight of her achievement only lands when you remember where she started. She was hired as a fitness model, a pretty face meant to stand at ringside, and by any reasonable expectation her ceiling was low and her shelf life short. She refused both. She trained obsessively, demanded to be taught to actually wrestle, and improved so dramatically, so fast, that within a few years the woman hired to be decoration was carrying the entire division and having some of the best matches on the show. She turned a job that was meant to use her into a career that changed the whole business, and now the young women she wrestles all grew up wanting to be her. Where is she now? She is a beloved, semi-active legend who gets to come back on her own terms, living proof that the door she helped open leads somewhere good. Lita. If Trish was the polished champion, Lita was the rebel, and together they were the two women who dragged the division into the main event conversation. Amy Dumas, wrestling as Lita, was a high-flying, tattooed, genuinely different kind of star who did moves off the top rope that the men were afraid to try, and she connected with a generation of fans who had never seen a woman wrestle like that, or look like that, or refuse to apologize for either. Today, Lita works part-time and behind the scenes, as a producer and trainer and occasional in-ring surprise, and she made history again a few years back by winning tag team gold long after her Hall of Fame induction. She helped build the road that the current women's revolution drives on, and she is treated by the younger roster as exactly the icon she is. What she gave a generation of young women was permission. Permission to be tough instead of dainty, to have tattoos and a rock and roll attitude, and a body built for athletics rather than for a magazine cover, to leap off the top rope and take the same risks the men took. Girls who had never seen themselves in a wrestling ring saw Lita and understood, suddenly, that there was a place for them exactly as they were. That kind of influence does not show up on a list of championships, but it is arguably more important than any title, because it changed who felt allowed to dream about this in the first place. Where is she now? She is a mentor and an architect, still turning up to remind everyone where the high-flying, no-apologies blueprint came from. Sable. She was one of the biggest attractions of the entire Attitude Era, full stop. Renee, wrestling as Sable, drew enormous mainstream attention to the women's division at a time when the company barely had one, an early WWF Women's Champion who was, for a stretch, one of the most recognizable faces in all of wrestling. Her star power was undeniable, and it helped prove there was a real audience for women on the card. Her story also includes a serious and important chapter, a high-profile lawsuit she filed against the company over the treatment of women in that era, which she later settled, and which reads very differently and very significantly in hindsight. Today, Sable lives a deliberately private life, away from the spotlight, married to one of the biggest stars the business ever produced. Her lawsuit deserves to be remembered as more than a footnote, because it took real courage in that era to stand up to the most powerful company in the industry and say that the way women were being treated was not acceptable. She was at the height of her fame and had everything to lose by speaking out, and she did it anyway. The business has changed enormously since then, and while 100 people deserve credit for that change, the willingness of a top star to put her name on a formal complaint helped crack open a conversation the company would have preferred to keep closed. That she then chose a quiet, private life rather than milking her fame for decades tells you she was never in it for the spotlight in the first place. Where is she now? She is quiet by choice, off the grid and content, a major star of her moment who decided the best second act was a peaceful one. A sensational Sherry. Before the modern division existed, Sherry Martel was doing the work that made it possible. Sensational Sherry was a champion in her own right, and even more influentially, the greatest manager of her era, the fiery, brilliant woman in the corner of some of the biggest male stars in the business, including Randy Savage and Shawn Michaels. She could wrestle, she could talk, she could draw heat like a furnace, and she made every star she stood beside bigger. Sherry died in June 2007 at 49 of an accidental overdose. She had already been honored in the Hall of Fame, recognized as one of the most important women the business ever had, decades before the current revolution proved her right. To watch her work is to understand how much a great manager could add to a star. She did not just stand in the corner and look the part. She wrestled when she had to, she talked when the moment called for it, and above all, she drew heat, real heat, the kind that made an entire arena want to see her comeuppance. And every ounce of that heat transferred to the man she stood beside and made him a bigger deal than he could have been alone. She was a genuine performer in an era that rarely gave women the room to be won, and she made herself essential anyway. The current generation of women who headline shows on their own names are standing on a foundation that sensational Sherry helped pour, one furious, fabulous night at a time. Where is she now? She is the foremother, the woman who showed that a female performer could be essential to the main event long before anyone was ready to admit it, and every woman on the marquee today owes her a debt. The names that get handed down. Here is something about wrestling that no other kind of fame quite has. It runs in families. It gets handed down like a trade, father to son, uncle to nephew, generation to generation. And if you have been paying attention to this book, you have already felt it happening underneath the stories. Think about how many times the same last names have come up. The Anoi family, the great Samoan dynasty, gave us Yokozuna and Umaga in the sadder pages of this book, and gave us the Rock at the very top of the mountain. And today its sons and cousins are the reigning royalty of the entire business, carrying every uncle and grandfather out to the ring with them, whether the crowd knows it or not. The Hearts of Calgary gave us Brett and the beloved Owen, and the ache of that family is woven right through the sport's history. Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream, mentored a whole generation and then watched his own son Cody grow up to main event the biggest show of the year, finishing the story the father started. Davy Boy Smith's children wrestle. Randy Savage's family tree runs through the business. Rey Mysterio wrestles alongside his own son. Why does it happen this way? Partly it is simple proximity, a kid who grows up in locker rooms and airports learning the trade the way a carpenter's child learns wood. But it is also something warmer than that. For all its brutality, wrestling is a family business in the truest sense, a strange traveling tribe that takes care of its own. And the men and women in it keep raising children who look at that hard, glorious life and say, in spite of everything they have seen it cost, I want that too. That is either the most troubling thing you could say about the business or the most beautiful, and the honest answer is that it is both at once. So when you watch a young wrestler today with a familiar last name, know that you are not just watching one person. You are watching a relay race that has been running for 70 years, a baton passed from hands that are in this book to hands that are just getting started. The giants never fully leave. They come back wearing their grandchildren's faces. The ones who became something else entirely. For most of these performers, wrestling was the mountaintop. But for a rare few, it turned out to be base camp. This last group used the ring as a launching pad into an entirely different life, and in a couple of cases, they became more famous outside the business than they ever were inside it. These are the second acts that got completely rewritten. Dave Bautista. He came to wrestling late and left it at exactly the right moment. Dave Bautista, wrestling simply as Batista, was a 6-time world champion and one of the biggest stars of the 2000s, an intimidating powerhouse who anchored the company for the better part of a decade. And then, in his 40s, he walked away to chase acting, and unlike almost everyone who ever tried that, he genuinely made it. Today, Dave Bautista is a respected working actor with a real range, best known to hundreds of millions as Drax in the Guardians of the Galaxy films, but increasingly choosing smaller, stranger, more challenging roles because he wants to be taken seriously as a craftsman, not just cast as the big guy. His slate stays full year after year. What is quietly impressive about Bautista is the direction he chose once he had the freedom to choose. A big man who breaks into movies is usually funneled straight into action roles, cast as the muscle, and Bautista could have coasted on that forever. Instead, he has deliberately sought out the harder parts, the character roles, the dramas, working with acclaimed directors and taking pay cuts to prove he can actually act rather than merely loom. He is chasing craft, not just paychecks, and the film world has increasingly taken him seriously because of it. He left wrestling cleanly at the right time with his body relatively intact, and he built a whole second life on his own terms. Where is he now? He is arguably the most successful wrestler-turned-actor of his generation, a man who quietly became a movie star and never once looked back at the ring with regret. John Cena. For 15 years, he was the face of the entire company, the last true crossover superstar the business made. A 16-time world champion whose never-give-up message made him a hero to a generation of kids, and famously, a lightning rod for their older brothers. John Cena was the constant, the man who granted more wishes to sick children than any celebrity in the world, all while being the most polarizing good guy wrestling ever produced. In 2025, he did the long goodbye, a year-long retirement tour, and he made it strange and interesting by turning villain for the first time in decades before wrestling his final match that December. Fans argued fiercely about how it all went, which is fitting for a career that fans always argued about. And the ring was only ever half of it. Cena is now a genuine Hollywood leading man and comedic star, with a film career that has outgrown his wrestling fame. There is a statistic about John Cena that reframes everything else. He has granted more wishes through the Make-A-Wish Foundation than any other person in the history of the organization, hundreds upon hundreds of them, more than anyone else has ever come close to, because when a seriously ill child gets one wish in the whole world, an astonishing number of them ask to meet him. Sit with what that means. Whatever the older fans chanted, whatever the arguments about his matches, thousands of families holding their breath over a sick child found their brightest day in a handshake from John Cena, and he showed up for every single one. That is the real career. The championships and the movies are almost beside the point next to that. Where is he now? He is retired from the ring and fully launched into the next thing, still at his core, the most relentlessly decent superstar the business ever made. Jesse the Body Ventura. He is the original proof that this thing could take you anywhere. Jesse Ventura was a bleached, boa-wearing loudmouth of a wrestler who was even better on commentary, where his gravel-voiced one-liners made him a star without a title. And then James Jonos did something no wrestler had ever done. He got elected governor of Minnesota, an actual sitting governor who had body-slammed people for a living. Today, Ventura is in his 70s and as restless as ever, a podcast host and author and outspoken commentator who never fully leaves the public conversation. occasionally turning up on wrestling broadcasts to remind everyone that the voice still works. He remains a genuinely polarizing political figure, and out of respect for the range of people listening, we will leave his current politics to him and simply salute the arc, which is astonishing. Set the politics aside entirely and just look at the shape of the life. A Navy veteran becomes a wrestler. The wrestler discovers he is even better with a microphone at the announce desk, inventing a style of loud, funny, unapologetic commentary that everyone who came after borrowed from. The announcer becomes a movie actor. The actor runs for governor of an entire American state as a long-shot outsider and wins and governs. No screenwriter would dare pitch that arc because no one would believe it. And yet a man who once wore feather boas and body-slammed people for a living genuinely sat in a governor's office making real decisions for millions of people. Whatever you think of him, the trajectory is one of the most remarkable in the history of American public life, and it started in a wrestling ring. Where is he now? He is the wrestler who became a governor, the single wildest career pivot this business ever produced, and he is still, unmistakably, the body. Diamond Dallas Page. His wrestling story is inspiring enough on its own. Page Falkenberg did not have his first match until he was in his mid-30s, an age when most wrestlers are winding down, and through sheer stubbornness, he made himself a 3-time WCW World Champion. But that is not why he is in this chapter. Diamond Dallas Page became something the business had never seen, a wellness entrepreneur, building a hugely successful yoga and fitness brand out of the program that rehabilitated his own broken body. And then he used it to perform miracles on other people, personally taking in broken-down wrestlers, Jake Roberts and Scott Hall among them, and helping to save their lives. He got the Hall of Fame call for his wrestling, but his real legacy might be the people he pulled back from the edge. Think about what that actually took. He was not a doctor or a therapist or a rich man with money to burn on other people's problems. He was a wrestler who had figured out how to fix his own broken body, and instead of keeping that to himself, he opened his home, literally, to men the business had given up on. He took Jake Roberts in when Jake was dying. He took Scott Hall in. He fed them and trained them and refused to let them quit, and he filmed it not to show off, but so that other people watching from their own dark places might believe it was possible. Plenty of famous people lend their names to good causes. Very few open the spare bedroom. That is the measure of Diamond Dallas Page, and it is why the wrestlers who know him speak about him the way you would speak about someone who once saved your life, because in several cases he did. Where is he now? He is wrestling's great humanitarian, a fitness mogul who spends his second act giving other people theirs, and he is one of the genuinely great human beings in this entire book. Sting. For his entire career, he was the loyal one, the man who never jumped ship. Steve Borden, wrestling as Sting, was the face of WCW, a multiple-time world champion who stayed with his company all the way to the end, and famously refused to sign with the industry giant during the years when everyone else did, which made him a kind of mythic holdout, the biggest star who had never appeared on the biggest stage. His ending was perfect, which almost never happens in this book. In March 2024, at 64 after 40 years, Sting wrestled his retirement match in All Elite Wrestling, won it alongside his young protege, and walked out a champion on his feet, celebrated whole. He called it the greatest moment of his career. The ending matters so much because of how rare it is in these pages. Read back through this book and count how many of these performers got to choose their own final moment, healthy and beloved and on their feet. Precious few. The business usually decides for you through injury or circumstance or worse. Sting wrestled for 4 decades, took punishment that should have wrecked him, stayed loyal to companies that did not always deserve the loyalty, and somehow arrived at the end with his body working, his dignity intact, and a stadium chanting his name as he chose to walk away. He is the storybook ending the rest of the roster dreams about. If anyone earned it, the loyal soldier in the face paint did. Where is he now? He is retired and beloved, and remarkably, undamaged by a business that damages nearly everyone, the loyal soldier who got the storybook send-off he earned. Ronda Rousey. She arrived in wrestling already famous. Ronda Rousey was the biggest star in the history of women's mixed martial arts, a UFC champion and genuine mainstream crossover celebrity. And when she came to WWE, she made history immediately, headlining the first women's main event at WrestleMania and winning championships. She proved that a female athlete could be positioned as the biggest attraction on the card, no qualifiers. Her relationship with the wrestling business was always a little prickly, and she left it in 2023 on cool terms, openly critical of parts of the industry and its culture. Since then, she has kept the fighting world guessing, turning up unexpectedly in wrestling and speaking about a return to serious competition. She is, by design, hard to predict. Whatever anyone makes of her prickly relationship with wrestling fans, the historical fact is enormous and permanent. When Ronda Rousey main-evented WrestleMania, it was the first time in the decades-long history of that show that women closed the biggest night of the year. And it happened in part because a genuine mainstream sports superstar lent the women's division a credibility the wider world could not ignore. She kicked open a door at the very top of the mountain that the pioneers earlier in this book had been pushing against from below for 30 years. She was never going to be a company person, never going to smile and play the game, and that independence is exactly what made her matter. Where is she now? She is a crossover champion who conquered 2 combat worlds and then walked away on her own terms, doing exactly what she wants, answering to no one, which was always the whole point of Ronda Rousey. Kurt Angle. He is the only person in this book who won a legitimate Olympic gold medal, and he did it, famously, with a broken neck. Kurt Angle was an amateur wrestling champion who turned professional and became one of the greatest in-ring performers the business has ever seen. A multiple-time world champion whose blend of real athletic credibility and surprising comedic timing made him a star almost overnight. The bill for that greatness was steep. Angle has been candid about the toll: 5 neck surgeries, fused vertebrae, a body he pushed past every reasonable limit, and he has made peace with the fact that his wrestling days are permanently over. In 2025, he moved into a new chapter as a leader and part owner of a professional freestyle wrestling venture, bringing his first love, real amateur wrestling, to a bigger stage. There is a poignancy in that particular second act. Kurt Angle gave professional wrestling so much of his body that he can no longer safely do the thing he loved. And rather than sit with that loss, he turned back toward the sport that started it all, the legitimate amateur wrestling in which he once won Olympic gold with a broken neck, and set about giving it the professional platform he thinks it deserves. He is honest, almost startlingly so, about the physical price he paid, the surgeries and the fused spine and the limits he now lives within, and he does not sugarcoat it for anyone thinking of following his path. But he is looking forward, building something new, which is its own kind of victory for a man whose body finally told him no. Where is he now? He is an Olympic champion turned wrestling legend turned promoter of the sport that made him, honest about his scars and looking forward instead of back. Triple H. For 25 years, he was one of the top performers in the company, a 14-time world champion known as The Game, the cerebral, sledgehammer-swinging leader of 2 of the most important factions the business ever had. Paul Levesque was as ambitious backstage as he was on screen, and he married into the family that owned the company, which earned him no shortage of skeptics who assumed that was the whole story. It was not. In September 2021, Levesque suffered a serious cardiac event, a genetic heart condition worsened by pneumonia, and it ended his in-ring career. But it opened the door to his real legacy. Today, Paul Levesque is the chief content officer of WWE, the man in charge of the entire creative direction of the company, the booker of the whole show, and by wide agreement he has done the job with a steadiness and a respect for the performers that has won over even the old skeptics. The kid who was accused of marrying his way to the top grew into the executive who now steers the entire ship. The proof of the man is in how the locker room talks about the change. When he took over creative, a wave of wrestlers who had felt overlooked for years suddenly found themselves pushed, trusted, and booked like they mattered. And many of them have said publicly that he treated them with a respect they had not felt from the company in a long time. He remembered what it was to be a performer with something to prove, and he built a system that gives the next generation the chances he had to claw for. That is a rare thing in any industry, a person who reaches the top and then reaches back. The heart scare that ended his in-ring career could have been the end of his story. Instead, he calls it the moment that redirected him toward the work he was actually built for, and the business is healthier for it. Where is he now? He runs it. He sits at the very top of the business he gave his body to, and he calls the cardiac scare that nearly killed him a gift, because it pointed him toward the work he was actually meant to do. Kane. This might be the most unlikely destination in the entire book. For decades, Glenn Jacobs was Kane, the masked, fire-summoning monster who terrorized WWE audiences for the better part of 30 years, the demon half-brother of The Undertaker, a multiple-time champion, and one of the longest-serving stars the company ever had. Under the mask, he was a thoughtful, well-read man with a degree and strong convictions, but to the audience, he was pure nightmare fuel. And then the nightmare ran for office and won. In 2018, Glenn Jacobs was elected mayor of Knox County, Tennessee, a real government executive presiding over hundreds of thousands of constituents, and he was re-elected to a second term in 2022. In 2026, he is completing that second term and term limited out of the office, with his name floated for higher statewide office down the road. Out of respect for the range of people listening, we will leave his politics to him and simply marvel at the arc. What makes the journey believable once you know him is that the monster was always the costume and the thoughtful man was always the truth. Glenn Jacobs read books between matches, thought hard about how the world worked, and carried himself backstage like a person with a plan for the day the mask came off. Most wrestlers dread that day because the character is the identity, and losing it leaves a hole. He treated the character as a job he was grateful for, and then walked calmly into an entirely different arena where the stakes were budgets and roads and schools instead of championships. The skills turned out to transfer better than anyone guessed. The comfort in front of a crowd, the discipline of the long grind, the knack for connecting with ordinary people, all of it followed him from the ring to the town hall. Where is he now? The man who spent 30 years as a silent, masked monster spends his days as an elected mayor giving speeches and cutting ribbons, which may be the single strangest and most wonderful sentence in this whole book. Booker T. He came up hard, turned his life around through wrestling, and became a 5-time world champion. And if you know anything about him, you just heard that phrase in his voice, 5-time, 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 because it became one of the most famous catchphrases the business ever produced. Booker Huffman, wrestling as Booker T, was one half of a legendary tag team and then a decorated singles star across every major company of his era. A genuine rags-to-royalty story who is now, deservedly, a 2-time Hall of Famer. His second act keeps him right in the middle of the thing he loves. Booker T is a broadcaster and analyst for WWE, and more meaningfully, the founder and owner of his own wrestling promotion and training school in Houston, where he pours everything he learned into the next generation, giving young hopefuls the same shot the business once gave him. His story carries a weight that the catchphrases can hide. Before wrestling, Booker Huffman had been to prison as a young man, and he has been open about how close he came to a life that goes nowhere good, and about how this strange, violent, beautiful business quite literally saved him, gave a lost young man a purpose and a discipline and a way to build something. That is why the school in Houston matters so much to him. He is not just teaching holds and bumps. He is offering other young people the same door that opened for him, the same chance to turn a hard start into a real life. A 5-time champion is an impressive line on a resume. A man who got a second chance and spends his days handing second chances to others is something better than impressive. Where is he now? He is a mentor and an owner, paying the whole thing forward, proof that a kid with the longest odds can end up running the school. Can you dig that? Rey Mysterio. Most of the people in this final section left the ring to become something else. Rey Mysterio became something else without ever leaving it. Oscar Gutierrez, wrestling behind the mask as Rey Mysterio, is one of the most beloved and influential luchadors in history. A former world champion and Royal Rumble winner who proved that a smaller man, an underdog the size of the guy in the cheap seats, could main event the biggest show of the year. Generations of fans who felt too small for their own dreams saw themselves in that mask. The remarkable part of his Where Are They Now is that the answer is still here, still going. In his 50s, Rey Mysterio remains an active, contracted WWE superstar, slowed by injuries but unwilling to stop, wrestling alongside a son who followed him into the business and dreaming of a proper farewell whenever it finally comes. He is a Hall of Famer who has not yet needed the past tense. The influence he has already had is almost impossible to overstate. An entire generation of the wrestlers on television today, the high flyers and the underdogs and the smaller athletes who were told they would never be taken seriously, grew up watching a masked man the size of a jockey main event the biggest shows in the world and beat giants twice his size. He made it thinkable. He turned the mask, a sacred tradition of Mexican lucha libre that he has protected fiercely his whole career, into one of the most beloved images in all of American pop culture, worn by kids of every background in every arena he enters. That he is still out there, still going, still absorbing punishment a man his age has every right to walk away from, is a gift to the fans who are not ready to say goodbye. Where is he now? He is the rare legend still writing the story in real time, the little man who never stopped proving that heart outlasts size, and the mask has become one of the most recognizable symbols in all of sports entertainment. A different kind of famous. Look at the whole span of it now, laid end to end. The giants who built the boom and the rebels who blew it up. The ones who became movie stars and governors and yoga moguls. The ones who kicked the door open for everyone who came after. And the ones we had to say goodbye to far too early. What strikes you when you gather them all in one place is how few of these stories are simple. The business took as much as it gave. It made men into gods on Saturday night and then asked their bodies to pay for the privilege on Sunday morning. It handed a few of them the whole world and handed others a road that ended in a hotel room at 38. And the same person could be both. Could be a hero to millions and a cautionary tale and a devoted parent and a wreck and a legend, all inside one lifetime, sometimes inside 1 year. That is the thing we forget when we freeze them at their peak. We remember the entrance music and the title belt, and we let ourselves believe the myth was the whole person. But the myth was the easy part. The person was the hard part, and the person is the part worth honoring. And here is the quiet lesson underneath all of it, the one that has nothing to do with wrestling at all. The people who landed soft were rarely the ones who had it easiest. Diamond Dallas Page did not have his first match until an age when most careers are ending. Dave Bautista was told he was too old and too green to matter. The women had to fight for the right to fight. What separated the good endings from the hard ones was almost never talent, because everyone in this book had talent to burn. It was something quieter, a willingness to reinvent, a friend who showed up at the right moment, a decision to get help before it was too late, a little bit of luck that no one earns. That is not a wrestling truth. That is just a true thing, and these enormous, painted, impossible people happen to illustrate it better than almost anyone. And maybe that is the real reason we keep asking where they are now. It is not only nostalgia, though there is plenty of that. It is that their lives, lived so loudly and so publicly, are a kind of map of what can happen to any of us. We watch them be invincible, and then we watch them be human, and somewhere in the distance between those two things is every fear and every hope we carry about our own second half. When one of them lands soft, it tells us it is possible. When one of them does not, it reminds us to be gentle with them and with ourselves. They were never really just wrestlers. They were a story the culture told itself about strength and its price, about fame and what comes after it, and about whether a person gets to write a good final chapter no matter how the middle went. The honest answer, spread across all these lives, is that sometimes you do and sometimes you do not, and that the difference is rarely deserved. Which is exactly why the kind thing is to root for all of them. A word for the listener. So here is what we would ask of you, now that you have taken this walk. The next time one of these names crosses your feed, the next time a wrestler you grew up watching turns up in a headline, remember that there was a real human being under the face paint, a person who gave you something on the worst weeks of your own life, who made you stand up in your living room and believe. Be a little gentler with them than the internet will be. Root for the comebacks. Forgive the ones who stumbled. Say a quiet thank you for the ones who are gone. They performed for you. They bled a little and they got up. And they did it again the next town over 300 nights a year so that you could have somewhere to put all that feeling on a Monday night. The least we can do is remember them as whole people, and not just as the giants we froze in time. Here is the last thing, and then we will let you go. Somewhere out there tonight, a person you have never heard of is lacing up boots in an armory or a high school gym in front of 200 people, dreaming the exact dream that every giant in this book once dreamed. Most of them will never be famous. All of them will pay some version of the same price. And they are doing it anyway, for the same reason all of these men and women did it, because there is nothing on earth like the sound of a crowd coming to its feet for you, and once you have heard it, you will chase it through any amount of pain. Be kind to them too, the ones just starting out, because some of them are the names your grandchildren will one day ask about. Where are they now? Right now, they are just beginning. Thank you for taking this walk back with us. Go call someone you used to watch the matches with. We will see you on the next one. Books by Barron, where are they now? A note on respect and language. This program was made in the belief that the people it profiles are owed dignity, especially the ones whose stories turned hard. Where a life involved addiction, injury, illness, legal trouble, or loss, we have tried to name the truth without wallowing in it. We did not include a subject in order to expose them, and we deliberately left out details that would serve only to sensationalize a person's worst moments. Contested matters are described as contested, and where we could not verify something, we left it out rather than guess. If we fell short of that standard anywhere, the fault is ours, and we welcome the correction. A note on sources. Everything in this book is drawn from the public record: published interviews and autobiographies, contemporaneous news reporting and obituaries, broadcast footage and official announcements. Present-day status for each subject was checked against current reporting rather than memory, because in this line of work especially, memory goes out of date fast, and the whole point of asking where they are now is to answer it accurately. Where accounts differed, we favored the most reliable and most recent. No private information was used, and nothing was invented. About the Where Are They Now series. Where Are They Now is a nostalgia retrospective series from Books by Barron that follows the people who once lived on our screens and asks the question time always leaves behind: what happened to them next? Each episode profiles a category of once famous people and tells, person by person, where they are now. The good landings and the hard roads and the quiet second acts, built entirely from the public record and narrated with warmth and respect. If this one meant something to you, there are more, and there is another on the way. Disclosure. This program is an independent work of biography and commentary produced by Books by Barron and Barron Darby. It is built entirely from publicly available information. It is not authorized, endorsed by, or affiliated with any of the individuals profiled, or their families, estates, representatives, studios, networks, or promotions, including World Wrestling Entertainment, All Elite Wrestling, or any other organization named. All interpretation and opinion expressed is the author's own commentary. Names, ring names, titles, and trademarks remain the property of their respective owners and are used here for the purposes of commentary, criticism, and historical discussion. Every effort has been made to be accurate and fair. Corrections are genuinely welcomed and will be addressed in good faith.